both as an English teacher in a public school and just as a human existing in the world, that we have, as a society, lost a lot of our interest in reading as well as our ability to read. We're losing the ability to sit down for a prolonged period of time with a book and read it. This strikes me as a great tragedy because reading is one of the ways that we can really grapple with what it means to be human, that we can really dig into the struggles that are kind of universal, things that all of us go through, the great existential worries of our time and of, the timeless existential worries of all the times. I love reading, partially because I'm a nerd, but partially because I'm very fascinated by being a human being. And I think it's a tragedy. It is a tragedy that we are not reading in the way that we used to as a society. And I think, I want to do something about this. I want to do something to help us remember how to read, learn how to read, not like literally just how to read words, but how to read a book, how to internalize themes and ideas and the universality of humanness. Anyway. And so I think I'm going to start doing a series on my channel here on Education in Context about how to read a novel. How do we read a novel? What does it entail, reading a whole novel? Hello, I'm editing and I realized I forgot to say something important, which is that I credit a lot of my love of reading to my father. When I was a little kid, my dad used to sit in our big recliner chair with me and with a book, and he would just read to me. And I loved having a story read to me. If it got confusing, he would step in and explain what was happening so I didn't get lost and we could keep going. And as a high school teacher, I've learned that a lot of my kids haven't had access to this experience, and I just think everybody should. I think everybody should. So I'm here to bring it to you. That's what we're doing. For this series where we're going to work on building our literacy skills, enjoying a beautiful piece of literature, diving into what it is to have fun being literate, we're going to read out loud, but we're also going to talk about what we're reading. So this is like, English class, but just like at your house for fun, which I know some of us are going, no, thank you, la, 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 but you got to hear me out. You want to have English class at your house for fun. This is a good thing. Bear with me. You'll see. It's going to be a good time. But I want to note for you that if you just want a straight reading of the book, you should go find an audiobook. They exist. They're out there. If you just want someone to read the book to you, and that's all you want from this, go find an audiobook. You're going to be annoyed with me. I'm going to interrupt myself. I'm going to talk about things. If you want reading and thoughts and to kind of see what the process is in my mind of how we read a novel like this, you're in the right place. You should stay here. So I'm going to start with one of my favorite novels, which is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. And I want to start with Wuthering Heights for two reasons. One, it is legitimately insane. It is one of the most unhinged books in existence. And I think there's something about how unhinged this novel is that is in line with the zeitgeist of the modern era, the general vibes that we are currently experiencing in time. I think we live in an unhinged world, and maybe we need an unhinged novel to cope with that. And the second reason is because it's out of copyright, so I'm not going to get in trouble for reading it on the internet. Okay, this is a slightly later insertion, which you can tell by the fact that my hair has dried, mostly. But I forgot to add a very important preface to Wuthering Heights, which is that, a very important warning, we should say. If you find yourself relating too much to Wuthering Heights, and especially to Heathcliff and Kathy, you should break up with whoever you're dating. This is something I wish somebody had told me my senior year of high school. So I'm going to tell you so you don't have to suffer like I did. If you relate too much to Wuthering Heights, break up with whoever you're dating. Okay, background information about Wuthering Heights. So Wuthering Heights is a novel by Emily Brontë, who's one of the famed Brontë sisters. There were three of them, Emily, Charlotte, and Anne. Emily only wrote one novel, which was Wuthering Heights. because she died at 30 years old on December 19th, 1848 of tuberculosis. This was about a year after Wuthering Heights was published on November 24th of 1847. So there are rumors that she had started another novel. The manuscript has never been found. The prevailing theory is that Charlotte or Anne destroyed it upon realizing that, Emily hadn't been able to finish it. They didn't want like a partially finished manuscript to get out there. That's speculation. We don't know if that's true. I think it's such a tragedy that she died very young because, it's always a tragedy when people die young, but also because we could have had more of this energy and we only have Wuthering Heights. So I guess we have to cherish this one. Anyway, so Emily, Charlotte, and Anne started out their literary careers publishing a book of poems together under pseudonyms, which were Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. And this was because at this time, women were not taken seriously in the literary world. And so Emily, Charlotte, and Anne, hey, Miss Angel, we do not need to bark right now. Come here. Say hi. Say hi to the good people on the internet. Please don't bark right now, okay? Okay, anyway, Emily, Charlotte, and Anne wanted to publish under male pseudonyms so that the literary world would have to take them more seriously. Wuthering Heights has at this point become an important part of the canon of British literature. So if you take a British literature class, there's a good chance you would read Wuthering Heights in that class. We consider it serious and important literature that you should read as a literate person at this point. It is part of the Gothic and Romantic movements or eras of literature. I would probably classify it as dark romantic, the Romantic era sort of split into two sides, and this would classify in my mind as dark romantic, which kind of gets into Gothic. So, Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. This is a Norton Critical edition, which means in addition to the actual text, it has a whole bunch of interesting essays of criticism and thoughts about this novel and lots of information about it. We're not going to read those together because they are under copyright. And I don't want to infringe anybody's copyright. I think everybody should make their money from the work that they did. Also, I don't want to get sued. But I'm pointing this out to you because if you are interested in reading serious literary criticism of a novel, especially something that is canonical in some canon of literature, you probably could find a Norton Critical edition or something similar, which would give you all that extra information. Personally, sometimes I read these things. I have an English degree. I learned how to do it. A lot of the time I don't. A lot of the time they're kind of pretentious and I get bored. That's the truth. Okay. I think they are very interesting. I think if you're bored, it's because you haven't learned how to appreciate something a lot of the time. But I also think that these bore me. The essays bore me, and that's okay. That's allowed. You're allowed to go no thank you to things in life. Anyway, this edition, Angel wants to be part of learning how to be literate. She's here for literacy. It's important stuff. Good. Okay, dude, now you're ruining literacy. You're ruining literacy, Angel. Anyway, now that I have settled my puppy Angel in next to me rather than on top of me, I want to note for you that Wuthering Heights originally was published in 1847, but then there was an 1850 edition after Emily Brontë had died, where Charlotte Brontë went in, she cleaned up a few things, she did a little bit of editing to try to make this book more understandable to people outside of the direct region that they lived in. And then she also added a couple of prefaces. So we're going to start off our intro by reading the prefaces that Charlotte Brontë wrote for this book, which are also out of copyright because they were written in 1850. I want to note for you before we really get started though, there is a lot of beautiful, luscious vocabulary, both in Charlotte's prefaces and in Emily Bronte's writing of the novel. And this is a good thing, okay? We build our vocabulary, we learn new words, we can insert words that are exactly the word for what we want to say into our own speech and our own writing. It also can be a challenge. If you have not been reading a lot, then this trickier vocabulary probably will be a struggle. There will probably be a lot of words that you don't know, that you haven't heard, because a lot of these words we don't use that often in modern life. And so if we haven't been reading, we might have missed the chance to learn them. But that's okay, because this is the chance to learn them now. So I'm going to tell you a story about me. When I was a junior in high school, I was feeling frustrated that my high school was not having us read all of the literary canon stuff that I wanted to read. And so I started reading Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë on my own time. And at first, it was frustrating. It felt kind of unintelligible. I just could not understand what I was reading. There were so many words per page that I was like, I don't know what that word is. I don't know what that means. This whole page makes no sense because I just am missing so many words. And so what I started doing was keeping a list of words that I didn't know. So I would just write down words that I didn't know as I was reading, and then I would go look them all up. I had like a dictionary app on my phone. And over time, even within like 3 chapters or so, my brain started to pick up the language. My brain started to kind of tie together and compute the way that like the rhythm of this writing. And I started to like see words over and over and start to understand what they were from context. And pretty quickly, it wasn't that difficult. It wasn't frustrating. And I started to really enjoy it. So if you are going along with us going like, I don't know that word. I don't understand what you just said. This makes no sense. It's full of big, scary vocab words. I want you to start a list of vocab words you don't know. You're just going to write the words down as we go. And then after each chapter, after each section, you're going to go look the words up and see what they mean. I promise you, if you do that for a little while, eventually it will start to click in your brain. This is how we become more literate. This is how we start to be able to read more complicated texts. It's frustrating at first, I will not lie to you, but it is worth it. It will get better, and I really encourage you to do that. There's nothing better than having a giant vocabulary. It really just makes life exciting, truly. Okay, let's actually get into it. We're going to start with the biographical notice of Ellis and Acton Bell, which was published in the 1850 edition of Wuthering Heights. This notice was written by Charlotte Brontë, Emily Bronte's sister. Yeah, let's get into it. It has been thought that all the works published... Oh, wait, I had one more thought I wanted to share with you first, sorry. That thought is, this has to do with kind of the history behind the pseudonyms Kerr, Acton, and Ellis Bell that the Brontë sisters were writing under. This is sort of Charlotte doing a big reveal, like, oh, surprise, it was actually us. Okay, here we go. It has been thought that all the works published under the names of Kerr, Ellis, and Acton Bell were, in reality, the production of one person. This mistake I endeavored to rectify by a few words of disclaimer prefixed to the 3rd edition of Jane Eyre. These two, it appears, failed to gain general credence, and now, on the occasion of a reprint of Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey, I am advised distinctly to state how the case really stands. So Agnes Grey is a novel written by Anne Brontë, the 3rd Brontë sister. I will admit that I read it because I wanted to be more of a completionist of reading the Brontë sisters, and my conclusion was that there is a reason why Emily and Charlotte are the famous Brontë sisters. I've heard, though, that Anne's other novel, something Wildfell Hall, I'll put that on the screen for you, what it's actually called, is more worthwhile. So maybe we'll read that one together at some point. Anyway, okay, continuing. Indeed, I feel myself that it is time the obscurity attending those two names, Ellis and Acton, was done away. The little mystery, which formerly yielded some harmless pleasure, has lost its interest. Circumstances are changed. It becomes, then, my duty to explain briefly the origin and authorship of the books written by Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. About 5 years ago, my 2 sisters and myself, after a somewhat prolonged period of separation, found ourselves reunited and at home. Resident in a remote district where education had made little progress, and where consequently there was no inducement to seek social intercourse beyond our own domestic circle, we were wholly dependent on ourselves and each other, on books and study, for the enjoyments and occupations of life. The highest stimulus, as well as the liveliest pleasure, we had known from childhood upwards, lay in attempts at literary composition. Formerly, we used to show each other what we wrote, but of late years this habit of communication and consultation had been discontinued. Hence it ensued that we were mutually ignorant of the progress we might respectively have made. Okay, so we've got sisters who like to write and show each other their writing as little kids, and they ended up all together in their house with absolutely nothing to do but write, which sounds to me like COVID if it had been productive and not so anxiety-inducing a little bit. Anyway, one day in the autumn of 1845, I accidentally lighted on a MS. MS is short for manuscript. Accidentally lighted on an MS volume of verse in my sister Emily's handwriting. Of course, I was not surprised, knowing that she could and did write verse. I looked it over, and something more than surprise seized me. A deep conviction that these were not common effusions, nor at all like the poetry women generally write. I thought them condensed and terse, vigorous and genuine. To my ear, they had also a peculiar music, wild, melancholy, and elevating. Okay, I have actually never read the Brontë sisters' poetry, which is showing, that even English majors miss things. So maybe we'll read that together at some point. I'm kind of interested to reading this preface. Okay. My sister Emily was not a person of demonstrative character, nor one on the recesses of whose mind and feelings, even those nearest and dearest to her, could, with impunity, intrude unlicensed. It took hours to reconcile her to the discovery I had made, and days to persuade her that such poems merited publication. I knew, however, that a mind like hers could not be without some latent spark of honorable ambition, and refused to be discouraged in my attempts to fan that spark to flame. So Charlotte's like, Emily, these poems are so good. And Emily's like, no, let me live. And Charlotte's like, no. Like, we're going to keep going until we get these poems published. Meantime, my younger sister quietly produced some of her own compositions, intimating that since Emily's had given me pleasure, I might like to look at hers. I could not but be a partial judge, yet I thought that these verses too had a sweet, sincere pathos of their own. We had very early cherished the dream of one day becoming authors. This dream, never relinquished even when distance divided and absorbing tasks occupied us, now suddenly acquired strength and consistency. It took the character of a resolve. We agreed to arrange a small selection of our poems and, if possible, get them printed. Averse to personal publicity, we veiled our own names under those of Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell, the ambiguous choice being dictated by a sort of conscientious scruple at assuming Christian names positively masculine, while we did not like to declare ourselves women because, without at that time suspecting that our mode of writing and thinking was not what is called feminine, we had a vague impression that authoresses are liable to be looked on with prejudice. We had noticed how critics sometimes use for their chastisement the weapon of personality, and for their reward a flattery, which is not true praise. So basically, the thing we were saying earlier, they wanted to be taken seriously as writers, so they wrote under male names. The bringing out of our little book was hard work. As was to be expected, neither we nor our poems were at all wanted, but for this we had been prepared at the outset. Though inexperienced ourselves, we had read the experience of others. The great puzzle lay in the difficulty of getting answers of any kind from the publishers to whom we applied. Being greatly harassed by this obstacle, I ventured to apply to the Messrs. Chambers of Edinburgh. Periods at the end of abbreviations. Sometimes I read them as the end of a sentence. Anyway, being greatly harassed by this obstacle, I ventured to apply to the Messrs. Chambers of Edinburgh for a word of advice. They may have forgotten the circumstance, but I have not. For from them I received a brief and businesslike but civil and sensible reply, on which we acted and at last made away. The book was printed. It is scarcely known, and all of it that merits to be known are the poems of Ellis Bell. The fixed conviction I held and hold of the worth of these poems has not indeed received the confirmation of much favorable criticism, but I must retain it notwithstanding. So she's like, okay, not a lot of people have been like, these are excellent, but they are, and I know they are, and I will not change my mind about this. Ill success failed to crush us. The mere effort to succeed had given a wonderful zest to existence. It must be pursued. We each set to work on a prose tale. Ellis Bell produced Wuthering Heights, Acton Bell, Alice Gray, and Currer Bell also wrote a narrative in one volume. These manuscripts were perseveringly obtruded upon various publishers for the space of a year and a half. Usually, their fate was an ignominious and abrupt dismissal. So they're writing novels, they're sending them off for publication, and the publishers are like, thank you, next. Which, that's still how it is. If you want to write a book, that's still how it is. At last, Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey were accepted on terms somewhat impoverishing to the two authors. Currer Bell's book found acceptance nowhere, nor any acknowledgement of merit, so that something like the chill of despair began to invade his heart. Currer Bell is Charlotte, who's writing this. This is what she says about herself. So that something like the chill of despair began to invade his heart. As a forlorn hope, he tried one publishing house more, Messrs. Smith and Elder. Ere long, in a much shorter space than that on which experience had taught him to calculate, there came a letter, which he opened in the dreary expectation of finding 2 hard, hopeless lines, intimating that Messrs. Smith and Elder were not disposed to publish the manuscript. And instead, he took it out of the envelope to a letter of 2 pages. He read it trembling. It declined, indeed, to publish that tale for business reasons, but it discussed its merits and demerits so courteously, so considerately, in a spirit so rational, with a discrimination so enlightened, that this very refusal cheered the author better than a vulgarly expressed acceptance would have done. It was added that a work in 3 volumes would meet with careful attention. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being rejected, but like beautifully and kindly. But that's what she's writing about here. I relate to that. If someone rejects you like beautifully and kindly and articulately, the whole thing is okay, even though you've been rejected. Or at least that's how I feel about it. And that's how Charlotte Brontë feels about it. So it has to be real, right? Okay. I was just then completing Jane Eyre. This is Charlotte Bronte's famous novel. I was just then completing Jane Eyre, at which I had been working while the 1-volume tale was plodding its weary round in London. In 3 weeks, I sent it off. Friendly and skillful hands took it in. This was in the commencement of September 1847. It came out before the close of October following, while Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey, my sister's works, which had already been in the press for months, still lingered under a different management. So, Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey were accepted for publication way before Jane Eyre, but Jane Eyre came out first. They appeared at last. Critics failed to do them justice. The immature but very real powers revealed in Wuthering Heights were scarcely recognized. Its import and nature were misunderstood, the identity of its author was misrepresented, and it was said that this was an earlier and ruder attempt of the same pen which had produced Jane Eyre. Unjust and grievous error! We laughed at it at first, but I deeply lament it now. Hence, I fear, arose a prejudice against the book. That writer who could attempt to palm off an inferior and immature production under cover of one successful effort must indeed be unduly eager after the secondary and sordid result of authorship, and pitiably indifferent to its true and honorable meed. If reviewers and the public truly believed this, no wonder that they looked darkly on the cheat. So, originally when Wuthering Heights came out, people thought that Charlotte Brontë had also written it. They thought it was not as good as Jane Eyre. So they were like, wow, you published a book and now you're just going to publish a worse book that you wrote first to try to grab money. Yet I must not be understood to make these things subject for reproach or complaint. I dare not do so. Respect for my sister's memory forbids me. By her, any such querulous manifestation would have been regarded as an unworthy and offensive weakness. It is my duty, as well as my pleasure, to acknowledge one exception to the general rule of criticism. One writer, endowed with the keen vision and fine sympathies of genius, has discerned the real nature of Wuthering Heights, and has, with equal accuracy, noted its beauties and touched on its faults. Too often do reviewers remind us of the mob of astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers gathered before the writing on the wall, and unable to read the characters or make known the interpretation. We have a right to rejoice when a true seer comes at last, some man in whom is an excellent spirit, to whom have been given light, wisdom, and understanding, who can accurately read the mean tickle a parson of an original mind, however unripe, however inefficiently cultured and partially expanded that mind may be, and who can say with confidence, this is the interpretation thereof. Yet, even the writer to whom I allude shares the mistake about the authorship, and does me the injustice to suppose that there was equivoque in my former rejection of this honor. As an honor, I regard it. May I assure him that I would scorn in this and in every other case to deal in equivoque. I believe language to have been given us to make our meaning clear and not to wrap it in dishonest doubt. So she's mad that they still think that she wrote Wuthering Heights. Oh, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. That's what it's called. The one by Anne Brontë. Okay. This is the one that people said I should read that was better than Agnes Grey, which I have not yet read. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Acton Bell had likewise an unfavorable reception. At this, I cannot wonder. The choice of subject was an entire mistake. Nothing less congruous with the writer's nature could be conceived. The motives which dictated this choice were pure, but I think slightly morbid. She had, in the course of her life, been called on to contemplate, near at hand and for a long time, the terrible effects of talents misused and faculties abused. Hers was naturally a sensitive, reserved, and dejected nature. What she saw sank very deeply into her mind. It did her harm. She brooded over it till she believed it to be a duty to reproduce every detail. Of course, with fictitious characters, incidents, and situations, as a warning to others. She hated her work, but would pursue it. When reasoned with on the subject, she regarded such reasonings as a temptation to self-indulgence. She must be honest. She must not varnish, soften, or conceal. This well-meant resolution brought on her misconstruction and some abuse, which she bore, as it was her custom to bear whatever was unpleasant, with mild, steady patience. She was a very sincere and practical Christian, but the tinge of religious melancholy communicated a sad shade to her brief, blameless life. So it sounds like Charlotte's not a huge fan of the tenant of Wildfell Hall, which is interesting. Okay. Neither Ellis nor Acton allowed herself for one moment to seek under want of encouragement. Energy nerved the one and endurance upheld the other. They were both prepared to try again. I would fain think that hope and the sense of power was yet strong within them. But a great change approached. Affliction came in that shape which to anticipate is dread, to look back on grief. In the very heat and burden of the day, the laborers failed over their work. My sister Emily first declined. The details of her illness are deep branded in my memory, but to dwell on them, either in thought or narrative, is not in my power. Never in all her life had she lingered over any task that lay before her, and she did not linger now. She sank rapidly. She made haste to leave us. Yet, while physically she perished, mentally she grew stronger than we had yet known her. Day by day, when I saw with what front she met suffering, I looked on her with an anguish of wonder and love. I have seen nothing like it, but indeed I have never seen her parallel in anything. Stronger than a man, simpler than a child, her nature stood alone. The awful point was that while full of ruth for others, on herself she had no pity. The spirit was inexorable to the flesh. From the trembling hand, the unnerved limbs, the faded eyes, the same service was exacted as they had rendered in health. To stand by and witness this, and not dare to remonstrate, was a pain no words can render. 2 cruel months of hope and fear passed painfully by, and the day came at last when the terrors and pains of death were to be undergone by this treasure, which had grown dearer and dearer to our hearts as it wasted before our eyes. Towards the decline of that day, we had nothing of Emily but her mortal remains as consumption left them. She died December 19th, 1848. We thought this enough, but we were utterly and presumptuously wrong. She was not buried ere Anne fell ill. She had not been committed to the grave a fortnight before we received distinct intimation that it was necessary to prepare our minds to see the younger sister go after the elder. Accordingly, she followed in the same path with slower step and with a patience that equaled the other's fortitude. I have said that she was religious, and it was by leaning on those Christian doctrines in which she firmly believed that she found support through her most painful journey. I witnessed their efficacy in her latest hour and greatest trial, and must bear my testimony to the calm triumph with which they brought her through. She died May 28th, 1849. So, this is a sad story. The Brontë sisters is a sad story. They had already had a lot of siblings die before these two died. So Charlotte Brontë watched a lot of siblings die, which is sad. What more shall I say about them? I cannot and need not say much more. In externals, they were 2 unobtrusive women. A perfectly secluded life gave them retiring manners and habits. In Emily's nature, the extremes of vigor and simplicity seemed to meet. Under an unsophisticated culture, inartificial tastes, and an unpretending outside, lay a secret power and fire that might have informed the brain and kindled the veins of a hero. But she had no worldly wisdom. Her powers were unadapted to the practical business of life. She would fail. I'll call my friend back in a minute. Anyway, it's still vibrating. Stop vibrating. I'm trying to read a book for YouTube. Anyway. Under an unsophisticated culture, inartificial tastes, and an unpretending outside lay a secret power and fire that might have informed the brain and kindled the veins of a hero. But she had no worldly wisdom. Her powers were unadapted to the practical business of life. She would fail to defend her most manifest rights, to consult her most legitimate advantage. An interpreter ought always to have stood between her and the world. Her will was not very flexible, and it generally opposed her interest. Her temper was magnanimous, but warm and sudden, her spirit altogether unbending. Anne's character was milder and more subdued. She wanted the power, the fire, the originality of her sister, but was well endowed with quiet virtues of her own. Long-suffering, self-denying, reflective, and intelligent. A constitutional reserve and taciturnity placed and kept her in the shade, and covered her mind, and especially her feelings, with a sort of nun-like veil, which was rarely lifted. Neither Emily nor Anne learned. They had no thought of filling their pitchers at the wellspring of other minds. They always wrote from the impulse of nature, the dictates of intuition, and from such stores of observation as their limited experience had enabled them to amass. I may sum up all by saying that for strangers they were nothing, for superficial observers less than nothing. But for those who had known them all their lives in the intimacy of close relationship, they were genuinely good and truly great. This notice has been written because I felt it a sacred duty to wipe the dust off their gravestones and leave their dear names free from soil. Currer Bell. September 19th, 1850. So those are Charlotte Bronte's thoughts about kind of the whole situation of herself and her sisters becoming writers. And also it sounds like some very honest thoughts about Emily and Anne's strengths and weaknesses as writers and even as people a little bit, which we don't always get that. We don't always get that kind of information from someone close to an author about what they were like. So this is interesting information going into our novel. Okay, and then finally, still in our introduction here, we have the editor's preface to the new edition of Wuthering Heights in 1850. And this is also written by Charlotte Brontë. This is where she explains that she read through Wuthering Heights and made some changes in order to make it more readable. So we're going to read through and find out what she did. I have just read over Wuthering Heights and for the first time have obtained a clear glimpse of what are termed, and perhaps really are, its faults. Have gained a definite notion of how it appears to other people, to strangers who knew nothing of the author, who are unacquainted with the locality where the scenes of the story are laid, and to whom the inhabitants, the customs, the natural characteristics of the outlying hills and hamlets in the West Riding of Yorkshire are things alien and unfamiliar. To all such Wuthering Heights must appear a rude and strange production. To all such, Wuthering Heights must appear a rude and strange production. The wild moors of the north of England can for them have no interest. The language, the manners, the very dwellings and household customs of the scattered inhabitants of those districts must be to such readers in a great measure unintelligible, and where intelligible, repulsive. Men and women who perhaps naturally very calm and with feelings moderate in degree and little marked in kind, have been trained from their cradle to observe the utmost evenness of manner and guardedness of language, will hardly know what to make of the rough, strong utterance, the harshly manifested passions, the unbridled aversions, and headlong partialities of unlettered moorland hinds and rugged moorland squires, who have grown up untaught and unchecked except by mentors as harsh as themselves. A large class of readers, likewise, will suffer greatly from the introduction into the pages of this work of words printed with all their letters, which it has become the custom to represent by the initial and final letter only, a blank line filling the interval. I may as well say at once that for this circumstance it is out of my power to apologize, deeming it myself a rational plan to write words at full length. The practice of hinting by single letters those expletives with which profane and violent persons are wont to garnish their discourse strikes me as a proceeding which, however well meant, is weak and futile. I cannot tell what good it does, what feeling it spares, what horror it conceals. So, Brontë sisters are on board with saying your swear words with your full chest, which could be an interesting discussion in terms of modern words, which words we are comfortable saying and which words we may edit out of things. Okay, with regard to the rusticity of Wuthering Heights, I admit the charge, for I feel the quality. It is rustic all through. It is moorish and wild and naughty as a root of heath. Nor was it natural that it should be otherwise, the author being herself a native and nursling of the moors. Doubtless, had her lot been cast in a town, her writings, if she had written at all, would have possessed another character. Even had chance or taste led her to choose a similar subject, she would have treated it otherwise. Had Ellis Bell been a lady or a gentleman accustomed to what is called the world, her view of a remote and unreclaimed region, as well as of the dwellers therein, would have differed greatly from that actually taken by the homebred country girl. Doubtless, it would have been wider, more comprehensive, Whether it would have been more original or more truthful is not so certain. As far as the scenery and locality are concerned, it could scarcely have been so sympathetic. Ellis Bell did not describe as one whose eye and taste alone found pleasure in the prospect. Her native hills were far more to her than a spectacle. They were what she lived in, and by as much as the wild birds their tenants, or as the heather their produce. Her descriptions, then, of natural scenery are what they should be, and all they should be. Where delineation of human character is concerned, the case is different. I am bound to avow that she had scarcely more practical knowledge of the peasantry amongst whom she lived than a nun has of the country people who sometimes pass her convent gates. My sister's disposition was not naturally gregarious. Circumstances favored and fostered her tendency to seclusion. Except to go to church or take a walk on the hills, she rarely crossed the threshold of home. Though her feeling for the people round was benevolent, intercourse with them she never sought, nor, with very few exceptions, ever experienced. And yet she knew them, knew their ways, their language, their family histories. She could hear of them with interest and talk of them with detail, minute, graphic, and accurate, but with them she rarely exchanged a word. Oh wait, that's not how that sentence goes. And yet she knew them, knew their ways, their language, their family histories. She could hear of them with interest and talk of them with detail, minute, graphic, and accurate, but with them she rarely exchanged a word. The punctuation there is funny. That's not how I would have punctuated that sentence. Anyway, hence it ensued that what her mind had gathered of the real concerning them was too exclusively confined to those tragic and terrible traits of which, in listening to the secret annals of every rude vicinage, the memory is sometimes compelled to receive the impress. Her imagination, which was a spirit more somber than sunny, more powerful than sportive, found in such traits material whence it wrought creations like Heathcliff, like Earnshaw, like Catherine. Having formed, those are the characters who we're going to meet in just a minute, or in the next video, I suppose. Having formed these beings, she did not know what she had done. If the auditor of her work, when read in manuscript, shuddered under the grinding influence of natures so relentless and implacable, of spirits so lost and fallen, if it was complained that the mere hearing of certain vivid and fearful scenes banished sleep by night and disturbed mental peace by day, Ellis Bell would wonder what was meant and suspect the complainant of affectation. Had she but lived, her mind would of itself have grown like a strong tree, loftier, straighter, wider spreading, and its matured fruits would have attained a mellower ripeness and sunnier bloom. But on that mind, time and experience alone could do work. To the influence of other intellects, it was not amenable. And she's like, if my sister had lived longer, she would have gotten it together, but like nobody could tell her to do it. Only time would have done it. And unfortunately, she died young. Like, left a little crazy. I don't know. No one can fix it. Having avowed that over much of Wuthering Heights there broods a horror of great darkness. That in its storm-heated and electrical atmosphere, we seem at times to breathe lightning. Let me point to those spots where clouded daylight and the eclipsed sun still attest their existence. For a specimen of true benevolence and homely fidelity, look at the character of Nellie Dean. For an example of constancy and tenderness, remark that of Edgar Linton. Some people will think these qualities do not shine so well incarnate as a man as they would do in a woman. But Ellis Bell could never be brought to comprehend this notion. Nothing moved her more than any insinuation that the faithfulness and clemency, the long-suffering and loving-kindness which are esteemed virtues in the daughters of Eve, become foibles in the sons of Adam. She held that mercy and forgiveness are the divinest attributes of the great being who made both man and woman, and that what clothes the Godhead in glory can disgrace no form of feeble humanity. What clothes the Godhead in glory can disgrace no form of feeble humanity. There is a dry saturnine humor in the delineation of old Joseph, and some glimpses of grace and gaiety animate the younger Catherine. Nor is even the first heroine of the name destitute of a certain strange beauty in her fierceness, or of honesty in the midst of perverted passion and passionate perversity. Heathcliff, indeed, stands unredeemed, never once swerving in his arrow-straight course to perdition, from the time when the little black-haired, swarthy thing, as dark as if it came from the devil, was first unrolled out of the bundle and set on its feet in the farmhouse kitchen, to the hour when Nellie Dean found the grim, stalwart corpse laid on its back in the panel-enclosed bed, with wide-gazing eyes that seemed to sneer at her attempts to close them, and parted lips and sharp white teeth that sneered too. Heathcliff betrays one solitary human feeling, and that is not his love for Catherine, which is a sentiment fierce and inhuman, a passion such as might boil and glow in the bad essence of some evil genius, a fire that might form the tormented center, the ever-suffering soul of a magnate of the infernal world, and by its quenchless and ceaseless ravage effect the execution of the decree which dooms him to carry hell with him wherever he wanders. No, the single link that connects Heathcliff with humanity is his rudely confessed regard for Hareton Earnshaw, the young man whom he has ruined, and then his half-implied esteem for Nellie Dean. These solitary traits omitted, we should say that he was a child neither of Lascar nor gypsy, but a man shape animated by demon life, a ghoul, an afreet. Whether it is right or advisable to create beings like Heathcliff, I do not know. I scarcely think it is. So maybe Charlotte Brontë thinks that Wuthering Heights was a little too unhinged for her. But this I know. The writer who possesses the creative gift owns something of which he is not always master, something that at times strangely wills and works for itself. He may lay down rules and devise principles, and to rules and principles it will perhaps for years lie in subjection. And then, haply, without any warning of revolt, there comes a time when it will no longer consent to harrow the valleys, or be bound with a band in the furrow, when it laughs at the multitude of the city and regards not the crying of the driver, when, refusing absolutely to make ropes out of sea sand any longer, it sets to work on statue hewing, and you have a Pluto or a Jove, a Tisiphone or a Psyche, a mermaid or a Madonna, as fate or inspiration direct. Be the work grim or glorious, dread or divine, you have little choice left, but I've never seen that word in my life. Quiescent adoption. As for you, the nominal artist, your share in it has been to work passively under dictates you neither delivered nor could question, that would not be uttered at your prayer, nor suppressed, nor changed at your caprice. Caprice? Caprice? Not sure. If the result be attractive, the world would praise you, who little deserve praise. If it be repulsive, the same world will blame you, who almost as little deserve blame. So she's talking about this sense that, like, as a writer, sometimes you start writing and your characters escape, they run away, they do their own thing, they don't listen to you. And in my experience writing fiction, this is absolutely true. You have an idea and then the characters kind of take on a life of their own and don't do what you want. This sounds crazy until you try writing fiction. If you think this is crazy, you should try writing fiction. You'll find out. It's just how it goes. Fortunately or unfortunately. There's nothing we can do about it. Okay. Wuthering Heights was hewn in a wild workshop with simple tools out of homely materials. This statuary found a granite block on a solitary moor. Gazing thereon, he saw how from the crag might be elicited a head, savage, swart, sinister, a form molded with at least one element of grandeur, power. He wrought with a rude chisel, and from no model but the vision of his meditations. With time and labor, the crag took human shape, and there it stands, colossal, dark, and frowning, half statue, half rock, in the former sense terrible and goblin-like, in the latter almost beautiful, for its coloring is of mellow gray, and moorland moss clothes it. And heath, with its blooming bells and balmy fragrance, grows faithfully close to the giant's foot. Currer Bell. Okay, so those are our prefaces. That's our little peek into what we're going to be reading. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to read this together. I love this book because it's so unhinged. I can't wait to share it with you. I hope you're excited. I hope you're excited to jump into Wuthering Heights with me. Okay. Hi, Angel. I forgot to say this in that clip. Please like and subscribe. It really helps out this channel. It's just a brand new channel, so every little bit of help really helps. Also, you don't want to miss the first chapter of Wuthering Heights, so you need to subscribe. It's important. For Emily Brontë. Okay, for real, bye.